Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Saoirse Healey. We've no guest in the studio tonight, so it's just me running through the top stories of the day from at home and abroad. As always, we start with our Ukraine update. It's day 512 of the war. Ukrainian sources have confirmed that 2 people have been killed and at least 27 injured in Russia's overnight attacks, which have targeted Odessa and Mykolaiv for a third successive night. Ukraine's military claimed to shoot down 5 cruise missiles and 13 attack drones out of 19 cruise missiles and 19 drones launched by Russia in total. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky offered condolences to the victims, saying, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Russian terrorists continue their attempts to destroy the life of our country. But the evil state has no missiles that are more powerful than our will to save lives, support each other, and win. After the attacks, Ukrainian presidential advisor Andriy Yermak made another appeal for tougher sanctions against Russia and more air defense supplies for Ukraine. Russia is responsible for a major global food supply crisis, the European Union's foreign policy chief Joseph Borrell said today. Grain prices have jumped after Russia's attacks on the Ukrainian ports. On Wednesday, Ukrainian officials said Russian strikes had destroyed 60,000 tons of grain awaiting export. Germany is working with allies to ensure that Ukrainian grain is not left to rot in silos and will intensify work on getting the grain out by rail, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said today. Ukraine will receive $1.5 billion from the World Bank, guaranteed by the government of Japan. The US warned that Russia may attack civilian ships on the Black Sea and then blame Ukrainian forces. Russia says all ships traveling to Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea will be considered carriers of military equipment from today. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense reciprocated, warning that all vessels heading in the waters of the Black Sea in the direction of seaports of the Russian Federation and Ukrainian seaports located on occupied Ukrainian territory may be considered by Ukraine as carrying military cargo. The Belarus Red Cross has sparked international outrage after its chief told Belarusian state television that the organization is actively involved in bringing Ukrainian children from Russian-occupied areas to Belarus. Russian media sources are reporting that Russian President Vladimir Putin will address the BRICS summit in South Africa remotely on the 23rd of August. Earlier this week, it was announced that by mutual consent between South Africa and Russia, Putin will not travel to the summit, as South Africa might be obligated to act on the ICC warrant for the Russian leader's arrest. The UK has added individuals and groups with links to Russia's Wagner Group and operating in Central African Republic and Mali to its sanctions list. The UK sanctions regime set up in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine will face its biggest legal test when a Soviet-era oligarch, Eugene Shvandler, an ally of Roman Abramovich, seeks a court order to release his assets, which include 2 private jets. A video has appeared purporting to show the Wagner mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin addressing his fighters in Belarus and calling the Russian war effort in Ukraine a disgrace, in the first footage of the Russian warlord to emerge since his mutiny last month. The first story of the night: by-election polls opened this morning in 3 English parliamentary seats, where said by-elections are being held as Rishi Sunak braced for an electoral test of his premiership. The Conservative-held constituencies are being targeted by Labour and the Liberal Democrats, who hope to overturn large majorities and send Tory MPs off into the summer recess, nervous about their own political futures come the general election. The polls opened at 7 a.m. this morning and close at 10 p.m. this evening, and voters can cast their ballots across the southwestern Tory stronghold of Somerton and Frome, Boris Johnson's old seat in the West London suburb of Uxbridge and South Ruislip, as well as Selby and Ainsty in North Yorkshire. Rishi Sunak was reported to be privately downcast on Wednesday afternoon about his party's electoral prospects, in part given the nature of why the contest was triggered. Boris Johnson stood down to avoid being suspended from Parliament over a report that found he misled MPs over Partygate. Adams quit over being passed for a peerage, and David Warburton, an MP in Somerset since 2015, quit after being investigated over claims of harassment and drug use. On top of the circumstances of the by-elections being called, Sunak's party is also polling poorly nationally. At a behind-closed-doors meeting of Tory backbenchers on the eve of the by-election, MPs said that he appeared to acknowledge the results would be tough. If the Conservatives are trounced, Sunak could become the first Prime Minister since Harold Wilson in 1968 to lose 3 by-elections in a single day. The safest Tory seat is Selby and Ainsty, which delivered a 20,000 majority at the 2019 general election. Both Labour and the Conservatives say they expect the result to be tight, within about 1,000 votes. Sir Keir Starmer's party want to pull off a win there to show that they can win in rural areas as well as metropolitan cities and their traditional former industrial heartlands. But the swing required is much greater than current polls suggest they would achieve in a general election. Somerton and Frome should also be a Tory safe seat, with the party holding a 19,000 majority at the last election. But after the loss of Tiverton and Honiton last year, which saw an area in neighbouring Devon clinched by the Liberal Democrats, it is considered the most likely to flip. In Uxbridge and South Ruislip, hopes of Tory resurgence have grown in recent days, given some anger at the extensions of the London ultra-low emission zone by the capital's Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan. The by-elections will be the first parliamentary elections where voter ID is required, after the scheme was rolled out to council elections in England earlier this spring. Voter turnout is expected to require careful analysis to determine what, if any, effect the voter ID requirements have on these elections. Staying with Westminster, Sir Keir Starmer has been challenged by the SNP to come clean on planned austerity 2.0. The SNP's Westminster leader Stephen Flynn has challenged Sir Keir Starmer on whether the Labour Party is secretly planning to keep a raft of Tory welfare cuts. Amid a growing backlash over Starmer's plans to keep the Tory 2-child cap, Stephen Flynn said the Labour Party must make clear whether it will scrap other Tory benefit cuts or consign thousands of children in Scotland to poverty. Mr. Flynn called on the Labour Party to reveal its position on 5 of the most damaging Tory cuts, whether it will include the reverse the £20 a week cut to universal credit, scrap the benefits cap, abolish the bedrooms tax, end the local housing allowance freeze, bring the education maintenance allowance back, the EMA. It comes as senior sources admitted to the Times that the Labour Party may keep further Tory cuts, with an ally of Starmer admitting that there will be more of these to come. Analysis for the SNP by the House of Commons Library this week revealed the 2-child cap has already pushed around 20,000 children in Scotland into poverty and around 410,000 across the UK. New analysis published today shows that the cuts to the EMA has taken about £6 billion of support from young people from the poorest backgrounds. Many more have been impacted by the full range of Tory cuts, which has hit millions of working families, children, disabled people, and those responsible with caring. Commenting, SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn said Sir Keir Starmer must come clean on whether the pro-Brexit Labour Party is secretly planning to keep a raft of the most damaging Tory cuts to family incomes. If Starmer can't even be trusted to get rid of the cruel 2-child cap, which has plunged thousands of Scottish children into poverty, people will be concerned about what other Tory policies he is willing to impose against Scotland's will. The SNP has also said that Sir Keir Starmer has abandoned thousands of families in Scotland to poverty, as new analysis reveals the areas of Scotland's worst hit by the 2-child cap. The analysis conducted by the SNP using the latest data available from the UK Government Department for Work and Pensions reveals Glasgow is the worst hit local authority in Scotland, with 3,990 households, which is 54%, in receipt of universal credit or child tax credits not receiving financial support for at least one child in April 2023. It's followed by Fife with 1,860 families hit, North Lanarkshire with 1,830 families hit, Edinburgh with 1,530 families hit, and South Lanarkshire with 1,420 families hit. By percentage of households hit, East Ayrshire comes off worse, with 3 in 5 households in receipt of universal credit or child tax credits not receiving financial support for at least one child in April of 2023. It's closely followed by Stirling at 58%, Aberdeen City 57%, Midlothian 57%, and West Dunbartonshire also sitting at 57%. Commenting, SNP social justice spokesperson and MP for Glasgow East, David Linden, said Sir Keir Starmer has abandoned thousands of families in Scotland to poverty by making the choice to keep the Tory two-child cap, demonstrating that independence is the only way to secure real change and a fairer future for Scotland. Politics is about priorities. The SNP government has prioritised tackling poverty by introducing progressive policies like the Scottish Child Payment, but the damaging policies of the Tories and the pro-Brexit Labour Party are pushing children back into poverty and undermining the progress. Mr. Lind added, the SNP is the only party offering real change with independence and real help with the cost of living. In contrast, Sunak and Starmer have clearly decided tackling poverty and helping families is not a priority for them. A giant wind farm off the Norfolk coast has been halted due to spiralling costs. The UK government's green energy ambitions have been dealt a blow after plans for a giant offshore wind farm off the coast of Norfolk ground to a halt due to spiralling supply chain costs and rising energy rates. The Swedish energy giant Vattenfall said it would stop work on the multi-billion-pound Norfolk Boreas wind farm designed to generate power for the equivalent of 1.5 million UK homes because it was no longer profitable. The state-owned company said its cost had climbed by 40% due to a rise in global gas prices, which fed through to the cost of manufacturing, putting significant pressures on all new offshore wind projects. It simply doesn't make sense to continue this project, said Anna Borg, Vattenfall's chief executive. Higher inflation and energy costs are affecting the entire energy sector, but the geopolitical situation has made offshore wind and its supply chain particularly vulnerable. Vattenfall won a UK government contract to build the Norfolk Boreas project last year after bidding a recordly low price of £37.35 per megawatt per hour for the electricity generated. According to its latest results, the decision to stop work has cost the company 5.5 billion Swedish krona, which is £415 million. But Borg said that the move was prudent, given the impact of costs on the project's future's profitability. Industry experts have said that without an overhaul of the UK government's financing approach to take into account the steep climb in cost, the UK risks missing its target to increase its offshore wind capacity fivefold to 50 gigawatts by 2030. Under the UK government scheme, developers can compete in an auction for the contract, which gives a guaranteed price for the electricity generated. If wholesale market prices are below this level, the project receives a top-up payment through the levy on energy bills. But if market prices are above the strike price, the project must pay back the difference to consumers, leading to lower bills. Setting the auction starting price at a higher point would result in a contract prices well below the current market rate, according to Ralston, meaning wind farms will have to continue to pay back to households for the foreseeable future. Dan McCrail, the chief executive of Renewable UK, said ministers would have to take into account global inflationary pressures, which have significantly changed the economic landscape. A former governor says the Bank of England is risking recession with interest rates rising. The Bank of England could plunge the UK into a recession by raising rates too far, the former governor Mervyn King has said. In a broadside a fortnight before bank officials are due to meet to decide the next step for interest rates, Lord King said the signals from the credit markets in 2021 that indicated inflation was about to rocket were now showing the price growth was about to drop sharply. Financial markets expect the bank to increase the base rate from a current level of 5% on the 3rd of August. In an interview for Bloomberg, King said officials on the Monetary Policy Committee could tighten monetary policy too far if they pushed for further rate increases, triggering a recession. He said the central banks had ignored signals from the money supply data which pointed to higher inflation coming out of the pandemic. The bank said it's defended its position, saying it delayed acting to calm inflation, believing the economy would go through a period of weak growth and high unemployment after the furlough scheme ended. The former governor's comments add to concerns about the bank's most aggressive series of rate rises in 3 decades and the impact it's having on the economy. Mortgage rates have sharply risen, and some economists have predicted unemployment could increase next year as corporate bankruptcies rise and job vacancies fall. Scotland's rural economy is under threat from post-Brexit UK government free trade agreements. The SNP have warned that Scotland's rural economy is set to be severely hit by free trade agreements negotiated by the UK and non-EU trading partners. It comes as research carried out by the Scottish Government found deals being negotiated with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the Gulf Cooperation Council pose a significant threat to key Scottish agricultural sectors, namely cereals like wheat and barley, livestock like dairy, beef, and sheep, as well as potatoes. Commenting, Pete Wishart MP said, "We warned that Brexit could be bad for Scottish farming, and so it is proving. Just as we feared, the Tories are already negotiating trade deals that hit Scottish farmers hard. I have a lot of sheep farmers in my constituency, but the Tories don't care about their fortunes. This research clearly shows this export for Scotch lamb and sheep meat is likely to contract, and worse, the more countries will be able to put product on our supermarket shelves. Our sheep farmers' best hope is to regain entry to the EU with access to the single market that can only be achieved with independence." House of Commons library analysis finds that students from low-income families lost out the most since education maintenance allowance was scrapped. This new analysis has revealed the damaging impact of a decade of UK government cuts to financial support to students. The House of Commons library analysis, commissioned by the SNP, shows students from low-income families have lost out on more than £6 billion of financial support since 2013/14 due to Tory Lib Dem government decisions to scrap the Education Maintenance Allowance, the EMA. The analysis shows that the weekly payments of up to £30 for young people in 16 to 19 education being kept and increased in line with inflation, they would now be worth £43.50 a week. If that funding had not been cut by the UK government, students from the poorest backgrounds would have received an estimated £833 million of support in 23 to 24. Despite pledging to keep the EMA during the 2010 elections, the Tories and Lib Dems broke their promise and abolished the allowance. They replaced it with the lower value discretionary bursary worth £658 million, less than the EMA in 2023 to 24, and paid to colleges, not students. The Scottish Government has protected the EMA, helping more than 344,000 young people from poorer backgrounds to stay in education over the past decade, with an average annual payment of £802 per student. The Scottish Government has spent more than £276 million protecting the allowance, despite the UK Government cuts. The House of Commons library analysis shows the average amount a single person spends on food at around £33.50 a week, is the same amount as the SNP government's EMA today in Scotland. The SNP has today challenged the Tories and the Labour Party to reintroduce the allowance in England, which would provide an additional £71 million a year for Scotland in Barnet consequentials to spend on supporting young people from the most deprived backgrounds. Commenting, SNP Education spokesperson Carol Monaghan MP said, "As the cost of living in the UK soars, it's clear Westminster is failing young people from the poorest backgrounds, and independence is essential in building a fairer future for Scotland. The shameful decision by the Tories and the Lib Dems to scrap the EMA has cost Scotland millions of pounds and meant students from the most deprived backgrounds in England face huge financial barriers to staying in on education, cementing inequality in the UK." Despite damaging Tory cuts, the SNP government has protected the EMA in Scotland, helping thousands of young people from low-income families get a better education. But we could do so much more if Scotland wasn't having to spend hundreds of millions mitigating Westminster cuts. Rishi Sunak says Falkland Islanders have the right to decide their own future after EU CELAC summit references the Islas Malvinas. Rishi Sunak has criticised the EU for its regrettable choice of words after it appeared to endorse the name that Argentina uses for the Falklands. Downing Street was reacting after EU leaders attending a summit in Brussels supported an Argentinian-backed declaration that used the name Islas Malvinas alongside the Falkland Islands. UK diplomats have been asking the EU to clarify its position, whilst Buenos Aires hailed a diplomatic triumph after the declaration was agreed at a meeting of EU leaders with counterparts from CELAC bloc of Latin America and the Caribbean on Tuesday. A spokesperson for the European External Action Service, the EU's diplomatic service, subsequently said the bloc had not changed its views on the disputed archipelago, as there had been no mandate from the Council of Member States. Sunak's official spokesperson said the Prime Minister's view is that it would have been entirely unacceptable for the EU to question the Falkland Islands' right to decide on their own future. Part of the declaration of the EU CELAC summit stated, regarding the question of the sovereignty of Islas Malvinas / the Falkland Islands, the European Union took note of CELAC's historical position based on the importance of dialogue and respect for international law in the peaceful solution of disputes. Santiago Cafiero, Argentina's foreign minister, said on Wednesday that his government hoped to further expand dialogue with the EU on the question of the islands off the back of this declaration. He added, "This joint declaration constitutes a further call from the international community for the UK to agree to meet its obligation to resume sovereignty negotiations with Argentina." Viaplay are to stop broadcasting Scottish football. Nordic streaming service Viaplay, the company which has the rights to broadcast Scottish national team games, has announced it is pulling out of the UK, US and Canada as part of a major downsizing. In its second quarter report, the company revealed that it will be laying off more than 25% of staff and is considering a potential sale. The redundancies are expected to impact around 450 people. Uncertainty hangs over the future of football broadcasting in Scotland, as Viaplay also had the rights to show the Scottish Cup. CEO Jørgen Madsen Lindman said the company will shift its focus to the core Nordic, Netherlands and Viaplay Select operations. He added that the company will be looking at a new operational model, downsizing, right-sizing and pricing its product offering the Nordics, and conducting an immediate strategic review of the entire business to consider all options, including content sublicensing, asset disposals, equity injections, or the sale of the whole group. The Scottish Green Party said that Viaplay's decision to pull out of the UK coverage must be followed by action to take Scotland international football matches from behind the paywall and make them free to view. They called on the Scottish Football Association and broadcasters to work together as a team to deliver a winning result by ensuring all Scotland fans can watch both men and women's teams on free-to-view television. The party spokesperson for sports, Gillian McKay, MSP, said Steve Clarke has done an amazing job with the Scotland's men team, yet so many of the most inspiring moments have been hidden behind a costly paywall. The SNP's Gavin Newlands, MP, said that the news that Viaplay are looking to exit the UK market, offloading their TV rights, including the Scotland men's team, will be a body blow to those losing jobs, but is an opportunity to reassess how our national teams are broadcast. The Scottish Ministerial Code has been updated to further strengthen transparency and propriety. Updates to the code include new text reflecting the updates to the procedure for handling complaints by civil servants about the behaviour of a minister or former minister, making clear for future complaints certain information about concluded cases will be made public, including the minister's name, the nature of the complaint and the outcome of the complaint, even after the minister has left office, and setting out the obligation on ministers to cooperate with this procedure. The introduction of an annual review of ministers' private interests and proactive publication of these interests on an annual basis to enhance the integrity and transparency around actual or perceived conflicts of interest. In addition, the new text has been introduced to provide additional clarity for ministers on managing overlaps between their ministerial responsibilities and constituency interests. General updates on provisions for maternity leave and to reflect the introduction of the Butte House Agreement, as well as minor amendments to take account of digital developments, new published strategies and changes in the ministerial titles and responsibilities. First Minister Humza Yousaf said this new edition of the Ministerial Code sets out the highest standards of propriety and transparency for government ministers. All Scottish ministers, including myself, are bound by its terms and are committed to uphold the principles of public life, ensuring integrity, accountability and honesty at every level of leadership. Scottish ministers are committed to building a better future for the people of Scotland while facing the profound challenges of our time. This will mean taking some tough decisions to ensure that we support those in greatest need, and it is vital that we are guided in this mission by a clear set of principles. So that's it for this evening. Thank you for tuning in. Before I go, I just wanted to remind everyone that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend heavily on the generosity of you, our viewers at home. So to everyone who's donated and signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you so much. Our programs will of course always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Right now, we have a pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay our bills and ensure that we are able to continue making programmes. So far, we have raised over £9,000, but we really need your help in raising the remaining £21,000 as soon as possible. Good night. Thank you for watching. I've been Saoirse Healey.